Valegia. I am the manager of Alumni Career Services here for the NC State Alumni Association, and I'm really excited about the topic today. So we've entitled it Jumpstart Your Job Search, Staffing Agencies 101. So we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is really interesting. It comes up a lot with different alumni that I meet with, and I could not think of a better person than Taylor Cook to discuss this topic with, because he has over 10 years of staffing experience. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Taylor, and then we're going to kind of dive into some questions and get some answers for you. So, raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, Taylor graduated from NC State with a degree in chemistry in 2004. He started working for the textiles giant Milliken in South Carolina before he realized that helping people find jobs was more meaningful career pursuit. He started with a small recruiting firm in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and then he began assisting people advance in their careers. So he took a chance and moved to Austin, where he heard so many wonderful things about the city and found it to be true. And then when he was in Austin in 2006, he continued his recruiting career. But then he got promoted, and he switched focuses from supporting people to advising companies find their staffing and HR needs. So he helped anywhere from Fortune 500 companies to small startups, and he really just enjoys bringing value to different types of organizations. So Taylor recently left the staffing industry, the staffing giant Kelly Services, but he now works as a recruiter for Automated Insight. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to do it a little bit differently than we've done in the past, in that I do like to get some live questions, but before we kind of get those coming through, I do have a handful of questions that I just want to get started with. Sure. Because sometimes the topic can be a little bit confusing. So we want to just make sure that we kind of set the precedent, know some of the questions that are going to be helpful, and then we'll open it up to you at the end for any questions that we might not have gotten to. So how we're going to break it up is that we're going to start talking about staffing companies in general. Then we're going to shift to talking about the companies who use staffing organizations. And then we're going to talk about candidates, so job seekers that may want to know a little bit more about if this is a path that they should take in their job search. So that was a lot of an intro. So just want to go ahead and get started. So staffing companies make up $150 billion industry. So how would you define a staffing agency?
I would say it's a company that will help other companies fill their open positions. So they could be filling full-time positions, they could be filling temporary positions, but it's really they're partnering with the company to almost be an extension of their HR department to help them with their hiring needs.
Okay, perfect. And one thing that we will be talking about is we're not talking about what it's like to work for a staffing company. We're rather talking about what it is like to work with a staffing company. So just to kind of set that precedent too. Okay, so what types of positions, I know you kind of mentioned it, but just kind of give me the overall types of positions that staffing companies fill, because a lot of times people think that it's just temporary positions.
Right.
But what would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception, is that they're just temporary roles if someone's out on maternity leave or if they're on a vacation for a couple of weeks, and maybe just admin type roles. But staffing companies really fill any type of position for any type of company. There are staffing companies that focus on manufacturing type jobs. I focused on filling civil engineering type jobs. The folks who are out at 2 a.m. pouring concrete as they're pouring asphalt and concrete as they're building roads. And of course, there are higher level executive search firms that fill C-level positions like CEO, COO, and then doctors, lawyers. They all have kind of their own niche types of staffing companies. So really any type of position.
Gotcha. Now, are most staffing companies really focused, like what you're saying, like there's a staffing company that specifically does engineering, or are they kind of, or do some do a lot of different types of recruiting too, or like different divisions or something like that?
Yeah, it's a mix. Most smaller companies will have more of a niche, like maybe they just try to fill IT roles, maybe they just try to fill sales roles or nursing or things like that. But the bigger ones will have different divisions where they'll have a scientific division, they'll have an engineering division, an IT division, and as a company they do everything, but they do have specific recruiters focused on the particular skill sets.
Okay. Very good. So you mentioned the word recruiter. So sometimes I hear other terms maybe used.
Mhm.
So is a recruiter the same thing as like a headhunter, would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. The terms can be used interchangeably. When I think of headhunter, I think of more of that higher level executive search where there's a distinct need that needs to be filled. We might have a target list of 10 to 15 or 20 candidates,
Okay.
and it's the recruiter or the headhunter's job to go find that person or see what those candidates' feelings are about the position. But I've heard recruiters call themselves recruiters, of course, headhunters, search consultants, just consultants, or just whatever kind of fancy title they try to think up for themselves.
Okay. Good that you can just kind of come up with something. Okay, so for the staffing company, I know this is a question that I've heard before. Is the company that the staffing organization is working with more important, or is the candidate, the job seeker, more important?
Sure, that's a good question. Both are obviously important, but I think it's important for people to realize that the company is the one that is paying the staffing company. So the staffing agency's loyalty, when the rubber meets the road, is probably going to go to the company's side because the company has a position that needs to be filled. And, while a recruiter might have a candidate they really like, it's ultimately the company's decision on who they hire.
Gotcha.
And so it's the staffing agency's responsibility to help them fill that need.
Okay. So are the staffing companies paying or how do they make money? I guess, like, should a job seeker pay somebody to go and do a search for them, or is it a free service? What would you say?
Most are free to the candidates.
Okay.
I'm sure there may be exceptions in certain cases where someone might pay for search help. Like, I know there are resume writing services and things like that, but that's different. In most cases, the company is paying the staffing agency.
Okay.
So that's usually how the arrangements are set up, and it can be in a number of different ways. Not to get too into it, but they could pay a percentage of someone's salary, or they can just do a markup rate off someone's pay rate or things like that. But generally paid for by the company. Okay.
Very good. So when you are a recruiter for a staffing organization, how are you finding job seekers?
Yeah, you find them in a number of different ways. Of course, the typical job boards like Monster and Career Builder. LinkedIn is obviously huge now, and recruiters are frequently on that. Some staffing agencies have their own job boards, or they have their job boards feed to the bigger aggregators like Indeed and things like that. So that's how they can post it on their own website and then collect resumes and applicants that way.
Okay. Awesome. So that was a really good kind of overview of the staffing company part. So now I just have a few questions about the companies who utilize staffing organizations. So why would they use a staffing organization? Because like you said, they have to spend money most of the time. So why would they use money to find a candidate?
So for a number of different reasons. A lot of times if they have project work with a defined beginning and a defined end, they don't need a full-time person to do that work. So they'll bring on a contractor or a temp who may have the specific experience. Like, especially here in the Triangle, Quintiles, or it's called IQVIA now, but they're a big contract research organization. They do drug trials they do clinical trials for drug companies. So once the trial starts, they need a clinical research associate. Once that trial ends, they don't need that person anymore. So they contract those people out. But other companies, like, a lot of startup companies who just don't have an HR department, they'll engage with staffing companies and bring someone on to either, they'll ask the staffing company to either hire that person directly as a full-time employee from day one, or maybe they're a little unsure and they want someone to start out as a temp or a contractor for 3 to 6 months, and they can see if it's a good fit. If the person likes the company and the company likes the person, then they'll eventually hire that person on full time. So a lot of different types of companies use it in different ways.
Gotcha. So what about, do the companies choose like one specific staffing organization? Because I just know you used to work for Kelly on site, but do they always just use one, or do they use multiple? And kind of, how does that work?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they can be used a lot of different ways. Most of the times I would say they'll use multiple staffing companies. Now, they may have a specific company like Kelly Services manage that overall program, but working within that program are 50 or 100 different staffing companies.
Okay. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
And that's, for bigger companies that are filling all sorts of different positions, whether it's, IT positions, engineering, quality assurance, HR, administration, they'll engage with some big companies who do all of those things. They'll engage with some smaller companies who are really focused on that, because each staffing company is going to bring different value to the program and to the client company. So they usually work with more than one.
Okay. So do they also, like, if they have a staffing company working on a specific position, do they also have someone internally recruiting for that position, or do they kind of just let reins loose and have them?
They might. I think smaller companies will have their HR and recruiters working on maybe the same position if they're just having a hard time filling the search and they want to bring in some extra help. Bigger companies make a clear delineation and they have their temporary positions and they have their full-time positions. And maybe they'll have someone apply for a full-time position who doesn't get that job, and then they'll refer that person to one of the contractor roles. But there's usually a pretty clear definition with the bigger companies.
Okay, very good. Very good. So now we're going to talk about the candidate or job seeker. And again, this may be to where we have a lot more questions coming in, but I think we have a good starting point, at least, just to get us rolling. So we are going to, one thing that I wanted to talk about is, as a job seeker, as a candidate, like, who should use a staffing organization? This is probably the most common question that I have come up when I meet with alums and discuss different career options is, should you be using a staffing company or should you not? So what I want to do is just give you a couple of scenarios and you tell me if that would be a good idea to use a staffing organization, or if there's maybe other approaches that they should be taking. So someone who maybe has taken a career break. So maybe it's been a month, maybe it's been 1 or 2 years, or even longer, depending on why they took the break. Should they use staffing organizations to get back into the field?
Absolutely. And in large part because if you've been out of the workforce for a little while, maybe you just took time off for family reasons or whatever the case may be, maybe your personal network is not as strong as you'd like it to be. And so it takes time to build that back up. But if you need a job very soon, then you'll want to really use as many resources as you can to find your next job.
Yeah.
And, companies will be more willing to take risks on contract or temporary workers because it's frankly easier to fire them than it is to fire full-time employees. So they're not as willing to take those types of chances if you've been out of the workforce, and so they don't want to take the risk of hiring you on because you've been out of the workforce for maybe 5 years, and it's a bit of a risk. But if they just bring you on in a contract role, they can kind of see how it works and see if it's a good fit. So
kind of get your feet wet a little bit, just get back into the field. Okay. So what about if someone's relocating? So maybe they're coming from Austin, Texas. They want to move back to Raleigh. They're maybe not in the area yet. Should they work with a recruiter that maybe is in that area to help them make that jump?
Yeah, I definitely would, because in that instance, the recruiter can also offer you insights about what it's like to work at these companies, they can give you insights into the job market in a new place. Again, your network is going to be weak in a new place, most likely. So definitely, again, just want to exercise all the resources you can to catapult your job search.
Sure. So should you work with a staffing company, third-party recruiter? Is it really just for people who have a ton of work experience, or could it be used for someone who's maybe a recent college graduate?
Sure, it can definitely be used for both. At a recent client company of mine, they routinely brought in entry-level grads for their manufacturing positions at a biotech company. So that was their main source of contractors, and they brought in the contractors they hired a lot of them from NC State, go Pack, and then they would keep them in the manufacturing roles, and then once the full-time positions came open, that was essentially their pool of candidates for full-time hires. So yeah, it's definitely a good, and again, your professional network's not as strong if you're an entry-level person, so a good resource to utilize.
Okay, good. And there might be other scenarios, but I think that's a really good start. Well, actually, one that came up. So what about a certain industry? So let's say that you have been working you mentioned civil engineering, you've been working in that field, but you want to try to shift a little bit and make a little bit of a career move to maybe a different type of engineering or technical role. Is it appropriate to use a staffing company then?
You can always try. I wouldn't recommend it because the client company will, when a big company will ask a staffing agency to find them a person, they want a person that's qualified.
Yeah.
And if you're switching industries, sure, obviously you're going to have skill sets that transfer, and you're going to have things that you can bring that company, but they're probably wanting people with, X amount of years of experience in that industry.
Okay.
So in that situation, I would try to really lean on your personal network, and because you are going to need someone to kind of take a chance on you a little bit.
Yeah. And kind of to that point, so sometimes I get individuals who they know the types of companies that they want to work for, or they've even have like a list of 5 to 10 companies that they would really love to be a part of. So in that case, should you try to seek out if there is a staffing company that works at the organization to sort of get your foot in the door? I mean, is that something, can you find out that information?
It can be difficult to find out which staffing companies an end company is using, but a lot of times if you apply to a job, you'll kind of find out that way. But I would again certainly use that as a resource. In that case, if I've got a target list of companies that I want to work for, I'm reaching out to people who work for that company directly.
Okay.
I'm applying to their jobs, of course, online. And then if I do find out that a particular staffing agency or recruiter is working with that company and they could provide me a foot in the door, then I would absolutely use that resource.
Right. So try to figure out insiders from people who currently work there. And if then you know that they use a staffing company, then you can use that.
Yep.
That completely makes sense. Okay, perfect. So should you use multiple staffing companies, or is that like disloyal if they kind of think of you for the same position with the same company? Like how does that work? Like, should you just kind of stick with one and be like, okay, this is the one I want to work with? Or is it good to just increase your odds and apply to multiple staffing companies?
I would definitely work with more than one,
Okay.
because that maximizes your chances of finding the position, which is the goal, right? And one staffing company is going to have a better relationship with a different set of companies than another staffing company. So they all have their pros and cons. When you talk to a staffing company, they're going to say, only work through me, or only, talk to me about jobs. I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
You don't have to tell them that. It's kind of a bit of a cat and mouse game, but I'm on the job search for me. I need to find a job, and it's going to maximize my chances of finding a good job if I work with more than one staffing company.
Okay. And I just saw a question come through that I thought was really good. So if I am a candidate looking to work with a staffing organization, do I get less of a salary because they're paying a company to find me?
That's hard to say. I mean, you certainly might, because, the companies are having to work within their budgets, but a lot of times they have that built in, and once someone is in the door, they want to pay everyone equitably.
Okay.
And so, I've even talked with hiring managers who want all of their people, full-timers and contractors, to be at the same pay rate. So it's not all the time.
Yeah. So what if we have somebody who comes in and they start in a contract position, or maybe even a contract to hire position,
Sure.
but then they get word about a full-time position? Is it really poor, I guess, is it bad to just leave to go to a permanent position? I mean, if you're working as a contract and you've said, hey, I'm going to work for you, but then you have a really great opportunity that is full-time. I mean, how do you navigate that situation as a job seeker?
So you mean a full-time position at another company is what you'd be taking?
Correct.
I mean, it depends, because you want to be careful not to get in a cycle of contract jobs, because
That's a good point.
recruiters can, and I'm probably guilty of it as well. Recruiters can look down upon folks who have worked a contract for 1 year, a contract for 2 years, then a contract, then a different contract, and then you can get stuck in this cycle of just taking contract to contract, and that's for some people. It's not for me.
Right.
And I think most people are probably searching for that full-time job.
Yeah.
So if you're in a contract or contract to hire position at your dream company, and you think it's going to go well, and you think there's a good light at the end of the tunnel, then maybe stick it out. But it's probably a safer bet to go with that full-time company. If you applied and you got a job offer, it's probably a company you want to work for. So it's all situational, but I would look more favorably upon a full-time offer.
Yeah. And kind of to talk on that, with some contract positions, it may be more relevant for industries too, right? So certain industries, it might be more common to work back-to-back contract jobs.
Right. Yeah,
Is that typically true?
Yeah, and a lot of, especially with a lot of more senior level folks who have worked, who have maybe worked in an industry for 20 years, and that's just the nature of some jobs work. I mentioned the clinical trials example earlier. A lot of IT projects have clearly defined beginnings and ends, and people work an IT project for a couple years, and then that's just kind of the nature of the business. But if that's what you want, that's your thing. That's not my thing. So I'm searching for the full-time job.
Right. Want a little bit more stability, maybe. Not for everyone. But so what kind of expectations should someone have when working with a staffing company? So if I'm a job seeker, should I just say, hey, I'm working with this recruiter, they're looking out for me, I don't need to do these other, like apply online and find this stuff, or should I really kind of broaden my search? I don't know what you would recommend, what expectations someone should have when working with a staffing company.
So I'd recommend using them, it's a tool in your tool belt as you're finding a job. So think of them as just something else you're doing.
Okay.
Of course, you're applying to jobs, you're on different companies' websites, you're on Indeed.com and things like that, looking for jobs, but also reach out to staffing companies to see what they can offer you. They may not offer you anything, but it's worth reaching out to them to see if they can offer you that position at the dream company, or maybe the stepping stone, right? Maybe to work at the dream company, you've got to work somewhere else first and get some solid experience.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I was going to make another point, and I forgot what it was.
Yeah, so I mean, they say, diversify your portfolio, but you should also diversify your job search.
Yeah,
right?
you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
And it's good to just not rely on them solely and expect them to call you back once you interview with them or once you apply to one of their jobs. Answer their call when they do.
Yeah.
And respond to them quickly, because if they're reaching back out to you, it's probably because they have good news, maybe an interview or something like that. But, I wouldn't just give them a call or send them your resume and expect a job in a couple weeks.
Okay. So keep the lines of communication open. I know that's something we had talked about before, is just if you are looking, they expect you to be looking for other positions while they're working with you. So if something, as a job candidate, if you get another offer, if you are moving forward with another position, just to let them know.
Yeah, good communication and honesty is, I think, at the end of the day, what all recruiters are expecting.
Yeah.
They want you to only be working with them. They want to hire you for their job because, frankly, they probably get paid if they're probably getting a commission if they hire you for one of their positions, but they understand, and they just want to be kept in the loop. If you have other interviews, I mean, they get it, right? Because you're on the job market. You're talking to them about positions. You're probably talking to other companies and maybe other staffing companies about open positions as well. So if you have 2 or 3 other interviews going on, or if you have an offer outstanding on the table, it's cool, but just let them know so that they can press their hiring manager and say, look, we have to make a decision on this person. He or she has 2 other offers that they're considering, and they need to make a decision quickly.
Sure. Yeah, that completely makes sense. So if I'm working for a staffing organization, how do benefits work? Like insurance, how does that work if I'm temporary or even contract to hire, with the potential to go full time? How does that work?
Some staffing companies offer benefits like health insurance and dental and vision and all that. Some don't. In my experience, when they are offered, they're not great. And when I say not great, it's not great coverage. It's kind of expensive. But it's better than not offering it.
Yeah.
But if you have a spouse that has a job that offers benefits, that is probably a better benefit situation.
Gotcha. So let's say you're working for an organization as, a temporary employee or maybe a contract to hire position. What are some things that you would recommend an employee do in their current position with that company to make them be hireable, to make the company want to hire them full time? Is there anything that they can do?
Go above and beyond. I mean, most companies will allow their contractors to take on extra projects. Nothing's stopping you from taking the lead on something or trying to learn about other departments, helping out your other coworkers and things like that. So, I mean, obviously when people are working, they want to put their best foot forward, but it's almost like you have to crank that up a little bit more when you're a contractor because not necessarily all eyes are on you, but a lot of times, especially in those contract to hire situations, it's kind of a working interview.
Right.
And so you want to approach it that way, and the obvious things like show up on time and things like that, and not have a whole lot of absences if you can avoid it. But really try to go above and beyond the expectations.
Yeah. So could working for a staffing company hurt you? Like if you are maybe you have an interview with a staffing company for another company, and that company, the client company, is interviewing a candidate not through a staffing organization. Could it hurt you that you are working with a staffing company because the company's paying that person, paying that company? That was a lot of company words. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but I think I know what you're saying. I mean, it depends, because hopefully you're a better candidate than that other person. And I think at the end of the day, they'll go with the better candidate.
Okay.
And worry about the, extra payment or whatever, right, on the back end. But because at the end of the day, most companies want to bring on good people. And if they have to pay a little extra, well, they're the ones who started working with the staffing company to begin with.
Right.
So they kind of got themselves into this.
Yes.
So
is very good advice.
They much rather go with the more qualified, better candidate.
Okay. So I think we're going to start taking a few questions. I know we had one. One that we have is, what are the downsides candidates go through a recruiter since the client company and, hold on, 1 second, the client is the company and not the candidate? Okay, so does that kind of make sense? The question that came through. So what are the downsides of a candidate going through recruiters?
Since the company is paying the staffing agency.
Right. I think that's kind of what we just alluded to in my very confusing question that I had.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that a little bit earlier, that, there certainly might be companies that end up paying a lower salary because they have to pay either a fee or have to pay a markup rate or something like that if the person is coming through a staffing company. But in my experience, there are lots of managers who want to make sure everyone's coming in at the same rate, make sure the pay is fair for the work is done. Because a lot of times, even as a temp or contractor, you're working alongside and doing the same job as full-time employees.
Right.
And companies know that people will talk and people will share what pay rates that they're making sometimes.
Yeah.
And they'd rather pay people the same rate than deal with the drama of trying to figure out and justify unequal pay rates.
Okay, gotcha. So another question that came through, what services do an executive search firm provide? Because we didn't talk about them as much.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a different level of service I'm not an executive. I've never worked directly with an executive search firm, but it's more just the level of person that they're targeting with their hires. So,
same
your
idea.
manager, your director level people, your VPs, and like I mentioned, your C-level, chief executive officer, chief operating officer types of positions. Maybe they take more time to qualify their candidates on the front end because, the positions that they're filling have a higher impact with the company they're filling them with. But so there might be maybe a different level of candidate service from that perspective. But it's partially because they're dealing with CEOs. And not only,
clientele.
that's a different clientele, but also when they place that CEO or COO, they want the new CEO to turn around and use them. So they want to make a good impression on these hiring, because these people are going to be hiring managers.
Yeah.
So they want to make a good impression.
Okay, gotcha. So Maria had a great question. Will you use a staffing agency if you want to change employers? So let's say you're already in a full-time position and you're wanting to work for another company. Would you use a staffing agency? I think that's where the term staffing kind of throws you off if you're already full-time.
Yeah, you certainly can, because there are definitely companies who will engage with staffing companies to fill full-time roles. But just make your expectations clear on the front end with the staffing company you're working with, that I'm not interested in temp or contract to hire jobs. I'm only interested in full-time jobs. So
so making your expectations clear.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. So I think one thing that I'm just curious about from your perspective, because you have worked in staffing for a long time, is what piece of advice would you tell somebody that wants to potentially work for a staffing company? Is there any sort of main thing that you think is important for a job seeker or candidate to keep in mind when approaching a relationship with a staffing organization?
I would say to give it a shot, be honest and open with your communication and your expectations with that staffing company. Again, not put all your eggs in that basket and use it as a tool in your job search. And if you have a bad experience with one, that's fine. That happens.
Yeah.
But don't be completely turned off to the entire staffing industry because you had one bad experience.
Okay.
I don't, if I have a bad meal at a restaurant, I don't never go out to eat again, right?
Right.
So,
You might not go back to that restaurant.
I might not go back to that restaurant.
Right. So you might not use that staffing organization, but
give another one a try. And again, just set the expectations and let them know your previous experience of what you didn't like about about your experience with that other staffing company, so that they know what to expect and know what kind of service, what level of service you prefer. And just keep working with them.
Just in addition to your job search, it can't really hurt, if it's, especially if it's free to you.
Exactly.
So, well, thank you so much for all the answers, all the questions. I really appreciate you being here, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Go Pack, and
Go Pack.
howl back.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.